My wife thought she was shocking me with divorce news. What she didn't know was, at 41, I believed I understood the architecture of trust, the quiet rhythms that hold a marriage together like invisible threads. My name is Christopher Walsh. I'm a warehouse operations supervisor for a regional distribution company in Phoenix, and 3 decades of experience had taught me to read patterns, to spot the subtle shifts that signal when systems start breaking down. But nothing prepared me for the night my wife Valentina chose my sister Charlotte's birthday celebration as the stage for her performance, the moment she decided to detonate our 15-year marriage in front of my entire family like some twisted form of entertainment. I was gripping the steering wheel in my parents' driveway, engine ticking as it cooled, when the text arrived about the dessert. Don't forget 34 candles, not the big number ones. Mom specifically requested individual flames. The house before me glowed with that familiar warmth, honey-colored light spilling from windows, the sound of my cousin's laughter drifting through the evening air like a promise of normalcy. This should have been effortless, a ritual I'd performed countless times, yet I sat there paralyzed by an inexplicable dread, as if some primitive part of my brain could smell the approaching storm. For months, Valentina had been circling our marriage like a predator studying wounded prey. The transformation started subtly, her phone gravitating away from shared spaces, passwords changing without explanation, late meetings that stretched past midnight with colleagues whose names never quite stayed consistent in her stories. She'd begun sleeping with noise-canceling earbuds, claiming my breathing disturbed her rest, and somehow I found myself adjusting my entire sleep schedule to accommodate her sudden hypersensitivity to sound. The arguments, when they surfaced, arrived like precision strikes, each one targeting a different aspect of my character. Why did I load the dishwasher with plates facing left when she'd mentioned preferring them right? Why did I schedule our annual HVAC service without consulting her calendar first? These weren't discussions, they were prosecutions, and I found myself pleading guilty to crimes I didn't understand, apologizing for thoughtfulness she now branded as control. Have you ever lived with someone who's already left but hasn't told you yet? The house develops this hollow echo, conversations become performances, and intimacy gets replaced by elaborate politeness. She insisted we attend Charlotte's celebration together, using the word should with the cold precision of a legal document. We should maintain appearances, she said, as if our marriage had become a quarterly report that needed filing. Inside, the aroma of my mother's legendary herb-crusted lamb mingled with roasted vegetables and the kind of wine she reserves for milestone occasions. Charlotte's husband Marcus greeted me with genuine warmth, pressing a cold beer into my palm while my father occupied his traditional post in the living room, pretending the pre-game show held more interest than the family dynamics unfolding around him. My mother orchestrated the evening with surgical precision, juggling multiple timers like a conductor managing a complex symphony, while my cousins formed their usual orbit around the kitchen island, stealing olives and exchanging gossip with the casual intimacy of people who've known each other since childhood. Everything felt intact, which made the growing void in my chest feel like a betrayal of their joy. Valentina arrived exactly 12 minutes late, not 11 or 13, but 12 precisely crafted minutes that screamed calculated rather than casual. She wore a midnight black dress that could transition seamlessly from boardroom to evening event, completely unadorned except for the conspicuous absence of her wedding ring, which had been residing in her jewelry dish for over a week now, ostensibly to prevent snagging on her yoga gear. She performed the social rituals with mechanical precision, kissing my mother's cheek with appropriate pressure, embracing Charlotte with measured enthusiasm, presenting a bouquet that looked suspiciously like a guilt offering from the grocery store's floral department. Then she claimed the seat furthest from me that could still be considered part of the same conversation, her phone positioned face down beside her water glass like a security blanket she might need to grab at any moment. I used to read Valentina's emotional weather through her hands, those expressive instruments that danced through the air when she was genuinely engaged, that reached for mine during movies or folded around hot coffee cups on lazy Sunday mornings. Tonight they remained imprisoned around her phone, occasionally fluttering down to scroll through messages with the furtive intensity of someone monitoring a crisis from which the rest of us were excluded. Marcus attempted to draw her into a story about their new rescue puppy, and she manufactured a laugh that hit all the technical requirements while missing the actual humor entirely. My mother inquired about her latest project deadlines, receiving the now standard response of, "It's complicated," which had become her universal deflection for anything requiring actual explanation. Charlotte noticed the distance and chose diplomatic ignorance, while my mother compensated with amplified hospitality, her natural warmth cranked up like a thermostat fighting a draft. My father, with 4 decades of marriage teaching him to recognize the subtle signs of domestic turbulence, observed everything while commenting on nothing. The cousins remained blissfully unaware, their conversation flowing around us like water around stones. I found myself counting place settings with the same methodical attention I brought to inventory management, old habits asserting themselves when emotional chaos threatened to overwhelm systematic thinking. They are invisible preparations a man makes when he senses his life shifting beneath him. 3 weeks earlier, I'd quietly transferred my emergency contact information back to my brother Samuel. I'd stopped the small gestures of partnership that once felt automatic, no longer filling Valentina's gas tank on Sunday mornings or picking up her dry cleaning on my way home from work. A go bag appeared in my trunk, containing fresh clothes and backup chargers, not from paranoia but from a trained understanding that contingency planning prevents panic when systems fail. We were still sharing the same address, still splitting grocery bills and utility payments, but my internal posture had fundamentally shifted, weight balanced forward, ready to move when movement became necessary. The evening progressed through its prescribed stages, my mother's military-precise timing ensuring seamless transitions between courses, conversation flowing from Charlotte's recent promotion to speculation about whether the massive oak in their backyard needed professional attention. Valentina contributed nothing meaningful to these exchanges, occasionally nodding with the distant attention of someone translating a foreign language in real time. When she did speak, her words carried that rehearsed quality of someone who's been practicing responses to questions they anticipate receiving. I watched her exhale slowly through her nose after each interaction, as if clearing a mental cue, the same breath pattern I'd observed in tense client meetings when bad news was dressed up as strategic pivoting. I attempted one neutral bridge when conversation lagged, asking about her commute from the downtown office, a question designed to invite participation without applying pressure. Fine, she replied, eyes immediately returning to her phone screen, the word delivered with the emotional investment of someone reading a grocery list. Her lipstick remained perfect throughout the meal, the only vibrant element in her entire presentation, like a single spot of color in an otherwise monochrome photograph. When my father carved the roast, he engaged me in shop talk about warehouse efficiency improvements, the kind of practical problem solving that reassures him his son possesses useful skills in an uncertain world. I described our recent success streamlining dock to truck transitions, cutting loading times by nearly 10 minutes through strategic staging rack repositioning. These concrete achievements grounded me, reminded me that competence in one area of life doesn't necessarily translate to failure in others, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Valentina's attention sharpened momentarily when I mentioned new client acquisitions, her eyes finding my face for the first time all evening before sliding away again when something on her screen demanded more urgent consideration. When something that once drew someone's genuine interest becomes background noise, you note the transition without judgment, filing it as data rather than injury. The living room television erupted in distant celebration as someone connected with a game-winning hit, my cousins echoing the enthusiasm with delayed recognition and exaggerated volume. The sound shattered whatever tension had been building, my mother's laughter joining the chorus with visible relief as she rose to retrieve Charlotte's birthday cake from the kitchen counter. Charlotte protested theatrically about the number of candles, performing the ritual complaint expected of adults who've crossed certain numerical thresholds, but she extinguished them all while the cousins documented everything with their phones, their off-key singing transforming the moment into something genuinely warm. Marcus kissed his wife's cheek with unconscious tenderness, and for those few minutes, whatever poison was circulating between Valentina and me belonged to a smaller, less significant universe. Then Valentina set her fork down with deliberate precision, the tiny metallic clink cutting through the ambient celebration like a blade through silk. She positioned her palms flat on either side of her plate, straightened her spine with military precision, and lifted her gaze to scan the table with the mechanical intensity of someone activating a camera recording. Her phone remained face down throughout this process, screen dark and ignored for the first time all evening. I witnessed the breath she took, deep and purposeful, the kind of preparation athletes make before attempting something that will either result in victory or complete destruction. The room continued its organic rhythm around her, unaware that someone was preparing to detonate an emotional explosive device in the center of their celebration. She raised her water glass as if proposing a toast, causing my mother's hands to freeze over the cake server, Charlotte's smile to calcify into something brittle and confused. I folded my napkin with a methodical care I developed in college when anxiety threatened to manifest through my hands, placing it beside my plate like a small white flag of surrender. Then Valentina spoke the words that would reshape everything that followed, her voice carrying the polished confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance until it felt natural. I'm finished with this marriage. The sentence landed in the center of our family gathering like a meteorite striking peaceful countryside, creating immediate devastation while everyone struggled to comprehend the scope of destruction. My mother made the softest sound imaginable, barely more than an exhale, while Charlotte's gaze found me first, her instinctive protective response revealing what she expected to witness next. 100 micro-reactions occurred simultaneously in the seconds following such an announcement. The refrigerator's hum became audible for the first time all evening. Someone's fork created tiny percussion against ceramic. A cousin in the adjacent room laughed at a television replay, the sound dying abruptly as the emotional shift penetrated even peripheral spaces. My water glass caught the overhead chandelier's light and cast a small oval reflection onto the white tablecloth, and somehow that geometric shape impressed itself more permanently into my memory than my own pulse rate, which remained surprisingly steady. My first emotion wasn't devastation or rage, but rather a profound sense of mathematical completion. The separate passwords, the mysterious late meetings, the sudden criticism of gestures that had once been appreciated, none of it had been random chaos requiring interpretation. It had been systematic preparation, and Valentina had just provided the equation solution. I lifted my water glass in what might have appeared to be a toast, but was actually punctuation, a period at the end of a sentence that had been building for months. Relief flooded through me, not the bitter satisfaction of being proven correct, but the deeper comfort that comes when reality finally aligns with suspicion. Before my mother's hand could drop or Charlotte's breathing could resume or the cousins could wander in from the living room to investigate the sudden silence, I opened my mouth to respond, but instead allowed the quiet to perform its own work first. The silence stretched beyond normal conversational gaps, becoming something almost physical in its weight, the kind of pause that makes mechanical sounds seem unnaturally amplified. I kept my glass elevated, maintaining eye contact with Valentina, letting the stillness establish its own authority before I finally spoke. My chest felt clear rather than tight, the sensation reminiscent of meetings finally reaching their actual purpose after hours of preliminary discussion. Charlotte moved first, her chair creaking as she shifted into her familiar role as family mediator, my mother's hand hovering frozen above the cake server like a conductor whose orchestra had suddenly stopped playing. My father leaned back with arms crossed, reading the situation with the same analytical attention he brought to contract negotiations, while Marcus studied his napkin as if it contained instructions for navigating domestic catastrophes. I set my glass down carefully and kept my voice level. What outcome are you hoping to achieve here? Valentina blinked, clearly thrown by the absence of emotional fireworks she'd apparently been expecting. I want to be honest with everyone. I'm profoundly unhappy. I've been struggling for an extended time, and pretending otherwise is emotionally exhausting. The words came out like prepared testimony. You could have shared this with me before the birthday candles were lit, I observed. She lifted her chin defensively. If I'd approached you privately, you would have minimized it, convinced me to delay, to try harder, to give it more time. I need witnesses to make this real. There it was, the script she'd been perfecting. My mother released the breath she'd been holding. Charlotte's hand found my arm beneath the table with the quick solidarity she'd shown since childhood when teachers called us out for classroom infractions. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Maybe everyone should take a moment to process this. Valentina spoke over him with increased volume. I'm moving out. I've already started researching options. I want to keep the house temporarily while I figure out my next steps. We can alternate custody of the dog. She delivered these details like bullet points from a corporate presentation, her eyes occasionally flicking toward her water glass where her phone waited like a teleprompter feeding her lines. My father's voice emerged from the table's far end, dry and measured. You chose to announce this here in front of all of us. I chose to stop hiding, Valentina replied, the word hiding carrying theatrical weight that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. My mother carefully set down the cake server as if it were made of spun glass. I kept my expression open and receptive. Unhappy in what specific ways? She hesitated, then reached for the standard relationship vocabulary. We want fundamentally different things. I need space to breathe. I don't feel seen or understood. Each phrase was tested briefly before deployment, as if she was gauging which combination would resonate most effectively with our audience. Charlotte's palm flattened against the table. Valentina, this is a birthday celebration. Exactly, Valentina responded, her volume increasing. Families deserve honesty. It's unfair to everyone to maintain these elaborate pretenses. My father's mouth compressed into a thin line that signaled his disapproval of theatrical displays, while my mother finally found her voice, soft but steady. You could have chosen a different time for this conversation. I'm done hiding, Valentina repeated louder, as if repetition could transform the concept into something noble rather than simply convenient for her timing. I looked at Charlotte. I'm handling this fine, I said quietly, then returned my attention to Valentina. Are you requesting a separation or divorce? Clarity helps people provide appropriate support. Her gaze flickered toward me as if I'd introduced an unexpected variable into her carefully planned equation. Separation initially, she said. I need time to evaluate who I am without all of this. The phrase all of this encompassed a mortgage, a beloved pet, a man who replaced air filters before they became problems, and a family that remembered her birthday with genuine affection. She waited for me to beg, and when pleading didn't materialize, she shifted tactics toward confrontation. You're not even going to ask why? You're not going to inquire about what you did wrong? I'm listening, I said simply. You treat existence like a checklist, she said, gesturing toward my mother's precisely timed cooking equipment as if the kitchen itself were conspiring against her. I need spontaneity. I need someone who meets me emotionally. You're stable. The word stable had apparently transformed from compliment to indictment during the time I wasn't paying attention. I allowed that accusation to settle without defense. Charlotte attempted to build a conversational bridge. Maybe you two should continue this discussion privately. No, Valentina said quickly. We handle this quietly and nothing changes. It just dissolves without acknowledgement. I want it named and witnessed. My father's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. My mother took the cue and began collecting dessert plates that had barely been touched. The cousins drifted into the doorway with pale faces full of curiosity, sensing adult business whose implications they couldn't fully process. Marcus, bless his diplomatic instincts, went to the living room and silenced the television, leaving the house unnaturally quiet. I studied the woman I'd married for 15 years. There are respectful ways to end significant relationships, and there are ways to use an audience as leverage for personal theater. Her choice revealed which path we were traveling. I kept my questions surgically simple. When did you make this decision? She considered lying and chose partial honesty instead. It's been developing over recent months. Would you be interested in counseling? She opened her mouth, closed it, then replied, I want change. Counseling creates change, I pointed out. It creates delay for something I already know needs to happen, she said, like someone who'd read the final chapter of a book in the bookstore and decided the entire story wasn't worth purchasing. The cousins took that as their cue to vanish. Charlotte stood and began collecting candles one by one, carrying them to the sink like tiny pieces of evidence, wax still warm between her fingers. My mother returned to the table and sat down with her hands folded, eyes shiny but completely dry. She turned toward Valentina. Have you packed belongings? Enough to stay with a friend temporarily, Valentina answered. Which friend? The question emerged before I'd consciously decided to ask it. Just a friend, she replied, but the specific name hovered behind her teeth like mercury waiting to spill. She swallowed it deliberately, and I let the evasion pass. This pressure testing would have its own timeline and consequences. My father leaned against the doorway, watching me rather than Valentina, caring less about theatrical displays than about how his son would choose to position himself under stress. I kept my spine relaxed and my voice conversational. When are you planning to move out? This week. Then we should discuss logistics later, I said, keeping it practical. Keys, utilities, the dog, calendar, coordination. Not tonight. She looked genuinely disappointed by my refusal to provide the dramatic confrontation her script apparently required. You don't even seem upset, she said. Do you feel anything at all? I do, I replied. I feel very clear. Charlotte sat back down with her shoulders squared, older sister energy hardening into something protective. She didn't speak, but her silence radiated a clear message that bleeding in front of the family table was absolutely forbidden. My mother, gracious to her core, reached toward Valentina's hand the way she always had when someone at our table was trembling. Valentina left her hand motionless, refusing the comfort. Marcus positioned himself behind Charlotte now, a solid presence ready to help with plates or escort someone to their car, whatever the moment demanded. Valentina straightened, preparing for one final theatrical push. I need you to acknowledge that you failed me emotionally, she demanded. I met her eyes directly. I'll own my responsibility in private. That's respect. You won't admit anything publicly? I just said I'll own it privately, I repeated. She shook her head with frustration that I wasn't providing the dramatic confession her performance required to conclude with a satisfying moral victory. The room held its breath again while I stood, not to raise my voice, but to mark a boundary with physical clarity. Charlotte and Marcus stepped back instinctively. My mother's eyes tracked me like someone monitoring a hot pan being removed from flame. My father uncrossed his arms. I lifted my glass again, just enough to punctuate the moment with something cleaner than argument. You have my answer, I said, setting the glass down with careful precision. We'll handle everything else like adults. She stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language she'd never studied. The performance required either a villain to argue against or a sobbing man to feel superior to, and I was providing neither role. The pressure in the room shifted away from my chest and settled squarely on hers, and for the first time all evening, she looked genuinely uncertain of her emotional footing. She reached for her phone with fingers that didn't quite stabilize on the first attempt. I watched the screen illuminate her face, watched my family observe her with complete clarity because she'd chosen to tell her story herself rather than allow others to guess at the details. Finally, with everyone waiting for an explosion that never materialized, the only sound in the house was Charlotte's lighter clicking in the kitchen as she relit one stubborn candle and rinsed it under the tap, preparing the wick for next year's celebration. I lifted my glass once more, let the stem settle between my fingers, and spoke like someone concluding a meeting that had already exceeded its scheduled time by 30 minutes. That's excellent news, Valentina, I said, my voice calm and even. I was wondering when you'd be ready to explain to everyone why. Its sound moved through the room like shifting tectonic plates, chairs adjusting positions, a fork being set down with deliberate care, the tiniest intake of breath from my mother. Valentina's face twitched just enough to reveal she'd packed for one conversation and discovered herself in an entirely different scenario. Why? She echoed, chin lifted but the word landing without conviction because endings make more narrative sense when they include proper context. I glanced down the table, not seeking backup but including the people she'd deliberately chosen as witnesses. You've already initiated the separation practically. Like last Tuesday's late meeting that extended past 11:30, the ride-share trip home from a bar that's nowhere near your office building, the goodnight text sent from a condominium less than a mile from Ryan's apartment. Charlotte's hand found the table edge. My father's eyes went flat and focused the way they did when reviewing contracts that required multiple readings. Marcus held perfectly still like someone trying not to startle a nervous animal. My mother didn't look away from Valentina. Valentina tried to recover. That's not. We have a major account rollout, half the team. Ryan is not half the team, I said, maintaining my calm tone. He's the colleague you started listing as art in your calendar system. He's also the person who canceled the next morning's meeting at 8:05 from that same condominium, according to the invitation email he forwarded to your account. You left preview notifications activated on your laptop. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again as she struggled to find solid ground. You're making this ugly. No, I said. I'm making it accurate. The room belonged to the truth for approximately 3 seconds before anyone else could claim it. I allowed it to breathe naturally. She stepped back from her chair as if physical distance could separate her from the words I'd spoken. This is exactly why I wanted witnesses, she said, reaching for moral high ground that wasn't available in this particular landscape. You twist everything. Then I'll be more specific. I kept my eyes on her, not to pin her like a specimen, but to spare everyone the emotional ping-pong match. On Friday at 12:17 p.m., $11,400 moved from our joint checking account to your personal savings. On Saturday morning, another $9,800. If you need financial resources to start over independently, you could have simply asked. Announcing that you're done after you've already relocated the funds isn't brave, it's just delayed disclosure. My mother's hand went to the necklace she never removes. Charlotte looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. Marcus cleared his throat and then reconsidered speaking. Valentina shook her head slowly, as if she could physically shake the room back to the version where she held moral superiority. I moved my own earnings, she said defensively. Agreed, I said. You're absolutely entitled to do that. That's why I didn't dispute the transfers. I contacted the bank and removed you as an authorized user on my cards. I redirected my direct deposit to a separate account. This isn't punishment, it's clarity. I let the word clarity hang in the air for a beat while she processed the implications. While you evaluate your life without me, you won't be using my financial resources to subsidize the process. My father's jaw ticked once, which translated to approval in his emotional vocabulary. Charlotte looked at me the way she used to when I solved mechanical problems in the garage without requesting Dad's assistance. My mother's eyes softened with something that wasn't pity but relief that someone had found the handle on a difficult door. Valentina's voice dropped so that everyone had to lean slightly forward to hear her. So that's it? You're proud that you found some emails? You're proud that you locked me out of financial accounts? I'm not proud, I said. I'm finished being a volunteer participant in my own disrespect. I set my glass down with finality, and I'm done negotiating with someone who announces life-changing decisions at a birthday dinner. She flinched at that, and I saw the first genuine flash of something real underneath the performance: embarrassment. The room had turned against her narrative, and she felt the emotional temperature drop. She reached for anger to warm herself. You're humiliating me, she said, in front of your family. I shook my head slowly. You chose the audience. I chose honesty. There's a fundamental difference. Charlotte stepped in then, her voice steady and clear. Valentina, she said, why didn't you talk to Christopher first? It was the obvious question that had been sitting under the table since the cake appeared. Valentina ignored it entirely. She looked at my mother with an expression designed to appeal to kindness the way lawyers appeal to precedent. I didn't want to lie to you, she said, her voice softer now. You always tell us that honesty matters. My mother nodded once. Honesty comes with proper timing, she said, and genuine care. I turned back to Valentina. You want space? You have it. You want change? It's already happening. I won't fight you on this, I won't drag out the process, but I also won't serve as your safety net while you're jumping. Meaning what? She asked. Meaning there's no open financial tab with my name attached, I said. Meaning I've placed holds on shared streaming services, cloud storage accounts, the Amazon Prime membership, and grocery delivery subscriptions. I've separated insurance policies. The utilities will remain active through the end of this month. After that, transfer whatever you want into your name. If you're staying in the house through September, you handle the mortgage starting in October. If you move sooner, text me a date and I'll schedule the locks changed. You can use the guest room for packing tomorrow between 9 and noon. I won't be there. The practical framework hit her harder than any emotional accusation could have. It transformed her dramatic "I'm done" into a calendar item with times and specific deliverables. Her mouth worked around a response and found nothing substantial. Marcus spoke up carefully. That sounds fair. Valentina shot him a look that suggested he'd joined the wrong team. He stared at his water glass and stayed quiet. And about Ryan, I added, because leaving it ambiguous would only poison future interactions. If he's just a colleague, establish clear boundaries. If he's something more significant, that's fine too. Just handle it after the situation is properly closed, not during the overlap. Her cheeks flushed with color, and she finally looked like the person I actually recognized, the one whose physical responses told the truth when her words wouldn't commit to it. There is nothing, she stopped. The sentence died organically, and she reached for righteous indignation again but came up with empty hands. I offered her a dignified exit. We can end this quietly, I said. No scorched earth policy, no half-truths shared over brunch conversations. You'll get a clean break, I'll reclaim my life. Nobody has to bleed unnecessarily for it. And if I change my mind? She asked. It escaped before she could edit it, and the room heard the uncertainty underneath her earlier confidence. Then you'll say so directly, I said, and I'll consider it carefully. But not tonight, not like this. I let my eyes move to Charlotte, to the cake waiting there like a stubborn reminder of what we'd actually gathered to celebrate. I won't trade my family's table for your theatrical stage. My father finally moved, slow and deliberate as if dismissing a courtroom. Coffee? He asked the room, and my mother stood as if she'd been waiting for permission to restore normal hospitality. The spell broke in the most civilized way possible. Water glasses refilled, plates shifted, the scrape of a chair that meant nothing more dramatic than creating space for people to breathe. Valentina remained standing, looking smaller now that the performance had concluded and the audience hadn't provided the applause she'd expected. She picked up her purse, hesitated, set it down again. I'll come by tomorrow, she said to the middle of the table, not specifically to me. 9 to noon, I confirmed. Text before you pull into the driveway. She looked at me as if she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe I hadn't seen myself clearly either. There's a quiet authority that emerges in a man who stops asking to be chosen, and it changes the fundamental geometry of every room he occupies. It changed this one. She turned to my mother. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time all evening, it sounded like she actually meant it. My mother nodded once, gracious even now, and didn't offer a hug. Timing and care, my mother said simply. Valentina left without slamming the door. The cousins in the hallway parted for her like respectful traffic. The porch light caught her shoulder, and then she was gone, absorbed into the evening like smoke dispersing in still air. I sat back down. Charlotte's hand landed on my back for a second, solid and approving. Marcus set a coffee mug near my right hand. My father poured carefully, like he was measuring something important. My mother pushed the cake server toward me with a small smile that said we were going to finish what we'd started. I took the first slice and passed it to Charlotte, then lifted my glass one final time. The house settled back into its ordinary sounds after she left, the dishwasher's gentle hum, my mother's measured footsteps, Charlotte's lighter tapping against the sink edge as she scraped away wax. Ordinary is a generous healer when you let it work. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize you've been holding your breath for months without knowing it? The first ping hit my phone before I'd even left my parents' street, a lengthy paragraph from Valentina attempting to reframe the evening as a simple miscommunication. I didn't mean to blindside anyone. I was overwhelmed. You know how anxious I get around your father. 2 seconds later came the follow-up. Can we talk tonight? Just the two of us? The old reflex rose immediately: fix, smooth, make it easier, find the compromise that keeps everyone comfortable. I watched that impulse pass through me like weather, noting its presence without being controlled by it. I responded with a single sentence: tomorrow 9 to 12 for packing as discussed. The three dots appeared, held, disappeared, held again, then vanished into digital silence. At home, the house had that hollow ring of a space that knows it's about to be divided. I put down the dog's water bowl and set my overnight bag by the front door, letting the quiet do the work of choosing for me. In the bathroom, I gathered my razor, toothbrush, cologne. In the closet, a week's worth of shirts and 2 suits. From the desk, passport, spare keys, the fireproof folder containing titles and insurance documentation. I zipped the bag and left it stationed by the door, then opened the guest room and cleared the bed so she'd have a clean surface for folding and sorting. Boundaries aren't punishment when they're implemented with precision and respect. At 10:41 p.m., another text arrived, longer this time, wandering through nostalgia, first apartment, first road trip together, before arriving at the real request: I just need to know you still want me. I wasn't romantic in my response, but I was honest. I want a marriage built on respect. You chose something different. We'll handle logistics tomorrow. She tried one more angle: you're being cold. I set the phone face down and slept through the night for the first time in weeks. Morning brought a smaller theater. 8:02 a.m., I'm outside, can we start early? I looked through the window. Her car sat at the curb with the engine running, her profile illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. 9 to 12, I replied. She wrote back, you're really going to make me wait out here? I fed the dog and made coffee. At 8:59, I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in carrying a canvas tote bag and wearing a tight jaw, surveyed the guest room I prepared, neat and ready for her use, and exhaled through her nose. The chaos she'd expected, me fumbling and emotional and unprepared, wasn't available for her consumption. She tried different approaches in sequence, like someone testing locked doors. Guilt first. Your mother looked at me like I was a criminal. I folded sweaters she handed me without commentary. Then blame. If you weren't so systematically task-oriented, I wouldn't have needed to make such a public statement. I passed her a showbox. You made a choice. You can own it. Third came attempted seduction, her hand lingering longer than necessary when it brushed mine, a softened voice, perfume she knew I found appealing. The pull was real. I'm not made of stone, but I put 3 folded t-shirts on the growing pile and stepped out of reach. Packing only, I said. The rules kept everyone safe. At 10:17, her phone illuminated with a name she hadn't intended me to see and a preview message she definitely hadn't intended for public consumption. Let's cool off for a while. HR is asking questions, and this is getting messy. The name wasn't saved as R or disguised as Art anymore, but displayed in full: Ryan Mitchell. She palmed the phone face down so quickly it clacked against the dresser's surface, and the air in the room shifted like pressure dropping before a storm. I picked up a framed photograph of us from a hiking trail in Sedona and placed it in the donation pile like a practical man setting down a tool he no longer uses. She shifted into panic mode, that thin layer underneath anger where desperation lives. Where am I even supposed to go? She asked, and the tote bag at her feet suddenly looked inadequate for the life she was trying to construct. You mentioned staying with a friend, I answered. She swallowed hard. Plans changed. I nodded and pulled out a folded envelope with her name written in my handwriting. There's a decent furnished rental 2 blocks off Maple Street. Month-to-month lease allows pets. You can walk the dog in the park there. The address and contact information sat on a printout I'd prepared the previous evening. If you want it, call today. It'll be rented by Friday. The envelope accomplished what my words couldn't. It put her situation on rails, gave her chaos a practical framework. She stared at my handwriting like it was written in a language she was still learning to read. You really thought this through completely, she said. It was recognition that the ground she'd planned to perform on had become a platform for systematic action. At 10:49, my mother texted me a photograph of Charlotte's half-melted birthday candle from the kitchen sink with a simple caption, "Wick trimmed for next year." It was her way of saying we cut away the damaged parts to make future lighting cleaner and brighter. Seconds later, Charlotte added me to a new family group thread, me, her mom, dad, Marcus, labeled dinner planning only. Her first message was refreshingly direct, no emotional commentary, just practical coordination. The thread pinned itself to the top of my phone like a promise of continuity. A minute later, Valentina's name flashed in a different group chat I'd forgotten I was part of. My cousin's spouses had created 1 year ago for coordinating holiday logistics. She'd posted a lengthy, vague paragraph about having to be brave in the face of controlling behavior. Charlotte dropped 2 surgical sentences into that thread. Announcements at birthday dinners aren't brave, they're inconsiderate. Then silence. The absence of additional commentary did all the heavy lifting. By 11:15, the guest room resembled a shipping depot after the last container had been loaded, organized boxes, labeled bags, nothing frantic or emotional, just the methodical dissolution of shared space. She paused at the doorway and looked down the hallway toward what had been our bedroom. "Can I take the duvet cover?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "It was a wedding gift." "If you want it, take it," I said. She hesitated. "It'll just make me sad looking at it." She left it folded on the chair. When a person's narrative starts crumbling, they reach for new storytellers to reconstruct it. Her mother called at 11:23. I couldn't hear the specific words, just the tone, shocked, then defensive, then that sharp edge that meant, well, what did he do wrong? You can hear maternal protection even through closed doors. Valentina kept her voice low and controlled, the way you do when shame and righteous anger are trying to occupy the same emotional space. A second call came at 11:31 from a friend whose name I recognized from her yoga studio. That conversation was all whispered outrage and promises of available couches that seemed to become less certain as the minutes ticked by. She hung up and stared at the wall for a long moment, then picked up packing tape and sealed another box. The betrayal was starting to feel like gravity, constant, undeniable, reshaping everything around it. At 11:42, her phone pinged with a final message from Ryan. "Let's not communicate for a while. Better for both of us professionally. No period, just empty space where punctuation should provide closure." She set the phone on top of a stack of folded jeans and continued packing. I remained available for logistical questions and unavailable for everything else. That's the boundary between cruelty and clarity. When she asked where the backup phone chargers were stored, I pointed to the drawer. When she asked if she could take the expensive coffee grinder, I said yes. When she asked, "Are you really finished with us?" I said, "I'm finished with performing for an audience that doesn't respect the show." At 11:58, she zipped the tote bag and surveyed the room like a traveler checking a hotel for forgotten belongings. "I'll come back for the remaining items," she said. "Text me with 3 possible times," I answered. "We'll select one that works." She nodded, then performed the gesture I'd been anticipating since the previous night. She looked directly at me without any protective posture or defensive positioning. "I didn't think you'd be this certain about everything," she said, and the word certain landed between us like a coin spinning in midair. "That's because I wasn't certain before," I said. "Now I am." She carried the first box toward the door, and the dog followed, sat, watched her movements, and then made his choice about pack hierarchy when the decision presented itself. That's not judgment. Dogs are simply honest about loyalty structures. She crouched down, scratched behind his ears, and stood up slowly. "Bye, buddy," she said, and the word cracked in the middle like a branch under too much weight. She knew that goodbye wasn't about paperwork or property division. It was about morning walks in January and emergency vet visits, and who had always shown up when showing up mattered. Out on the porch, heat rose from the concrete in visible waves. She loaded her trunk, closed it gently, and stood with her hand on the lid like she was taking some kind of oath. "I'll send you the available times," she said. "Good." She looked past me into the house, and for a split second I saw the woman who used to leave her coffee mug on the counter for me to discover and rinse, who used to steal my hoodies and sleep in them during cold Sunday afternoons. Then she got in the car and drove away. Inside, the guest room looked like a shipping dock after the last freight train departs, scuffed, empty, somehow larger than it had been when it contained her belongings. I wiped down the dresser surface and carried the donation pile to my car trunk. On the way back inside, my phone buzzed with Charlotte's name again. A single line, she tried posting her version in our group chat. Another line followed immediately, it's not gaining traction. I poured fresh water into the dog's bowl and opened windows to let the stagnant argument air circulate. The house inhaled like someone who'd been holding their breath for months. A minute later, my mother's name appeared on my screen with a photograph of our dining room table, already reset for normal use, no drama, no ceremony, just order restored. Underneath, she wrote, "We remain a family." By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the neighborhood was performing its regular weekday rhythm: delivery trucks, lawnmowers, a kid on a scooter moving too fast and answering to no one. Inside, her theatrical production had concluded not with a monologue but with logistics and labeled boxes. The panic had burned off, the guilt had found no solid ground to take root, the blame had run out of willing audience members. People always reveal their authentic selves when the crowd disperses and the applause stops coming. I wiped down the kitchen counter, placed my coffee mug in the sink, and scheduled a locksmith appointment. Respect isn't loud or dramatic, it's the quiet click of a boundary settling into its proper place. Monday morning started with the locksmith on my porch at 8 sharp, a quiet professional with a toolkit and clipboard who didn't require explanations. I walked him through the exterior doors and garage entry, signed his invoice, and watched him drop shiny new keys into my palm like simple, solid answers to complicated questions. The dog followed him from door to door, tail elevated as if he understood we were sealing openings that had been compromised. After the locksmith left, I stood in the foyer and listened to the lock mechanism engage. The click felt less like building a fortress and more like installing proper boundaries. At 10, I met with an attorney in an office that smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish and organized paperwork. She was direct, efficient, and completely unbothered by domestic drama. I presented the facts like a distribution plan, dates, financial transactions, screenshots, the public announcement at my mother's table. She listened without interrupting, then outlined a path with clearly marked checkboxes and reasonable deadlines. "No contested complications if we can avoid them," she said. "Clean lines, protection where it matters most." We drafted terms that reflected reality: no spousal support given the brief marriage duration and her established income, equitable division of house sale proceeds if she chose to sell, or refinancing in her sole name within 90 days if she wanted to keep it. Separate accounts already established, pet custody with me since I'd handled all veterinary care and daily responsibilities. I signed where she indicated. On the drive home, I stopped for a few practical necessities: fresh towel sets, additional bed linens, a replacement coffee grinder since the old one had departed in a tote bag. I picked up a basic toolbox because there's always something that needs adjustment when you start paying attention to maintenance. Back at the house, I worked through a systematic checklist, changed Wi-Fi password, disabled shared device locations, switched automatic payments to my personal account. The rhythm of small corrections steadied me the way stepping onto a moving walkway aligns your pace with forward momentum. Valentina texted that afternoon, 3 words that contained entire universes of implication. "Can we talk?" There are hundreds of ways to interpret that sentence, and for years I would have heard, "Can you rescue me from the consequences of my own choices?" I typed back 6 words that established a new operational framework: all communication through legal counsel now. She responded with digital silence, then an hour later sent a photograph of a door key resting in her palm with the question, "Where should I leave this?" "Mailbox," I wrote back. I heard the metal lid clatter around 6 o'clock. The dog barked once, brief and confused, then returned to sleeping under the kitchen table. People assume the difficult part is the confrontation itself, but it isn't. The challenge comes in the space afterward, when your hands are empty and you could start negotiating with yourself, convincing yourself that loneliness might be worse than disrespect. That's where men make compromises they can't live with long term. I kept my hands occupied with purposeful tasks. I removed the photographs that belonged to a different season and wrapped the frames in brown paper for storage. I left the small dents in the hallway wall where we'd maneuvered furniture too quickly. Not everything requires erasure. I moved my clothes to the left side of our shared closet because I'd always preferred that side and somehow surrendered it during our second year together. You discover things about yourself when the house goes quiet, and some revelations are trivial while others reshape how you understand your own preferences. My family maintained appropriate boundaries while demonstrating consistent support. Charlotte dropped a casserole on my porch with a post-it note reading, "Don't overcook this like last time." My father appeared to consult about a sprinkler head issue, which meant he spent 20 minutes in the yard examining perfectly functional irrigation while ensuring I wasn't bleeding internally. My mother sent a sunset photograph with pink clouds striping the sky above their neighborhood, captions simply "Light always finds a way." That's her version of practical theology, no sermons, just evidence that beautiful things persist through difficult transitions. By Wednesday, the paperwork had graduated from our phones into the official world of stamps and manila envelopes. My attorney emailed copies of documents bearing Valentina's signature, neat and compact, as if she hoped smaller handwriting could make the dissolution tidier than it actually was. The next morning, a message from her number materialized on my screen and hovered there unread. I'd established a personal rule: no touching anything that pulls you backward before 10 a.m. and a proper workout. At the gym, I performed deadlifts, nothing heroic, just weight that demanded complete attention and proper form. There's something fundamentally honest about a loaded barbell. It responds to competence and consistency, not to speeches or emotional manipulation. After drinking water in the parking lot while my heart rate returned to baseline, I opened the message. It was a lengthy apology that never quite used the words, "I did this." The language circled through "we," "us," and "what happened," as if our marriage had been dissolved by natural disaster rather than deliberate choice. At the end, she wrote, "I don't want to be the villain in your story. I understood the sentiment, nobody does." I didn't reply, maintaining the boundary we'd established through legal counsel. We scheduled her final pickup window for Saturday, and I arranged to be elsewhere during that time. Work provided its own form of healing because logistics always need managing regardless of domestic upheaval. Freight still required movement, drivers still needed clear loading docks, and delayed shipments remained problematic whether or not someone texted you at midnight with regrets and second thoughts. My crew didn't request details about my personal situation. Men who respect each other demonstrate care by maintaining professional excellence during difficult periods. We ran exceptionally clean numbers that week, and I performed my responsibilities like someone whose private life finally aligned with his public standards. There's a moment in every significant ending where you expect to feel triumphant and instead discover something more complex, relief with complicated edges. It arrived on Sunday morning while I was sweeping the kitchen floor, sunlight streaming across clean surfaces, coffee brewing in the French press, the dog following my broom like it was an interactive toy. I realized I could make spontaneous plans to visit my parents for lunch without consulting a shared calendar or negotiating around someone else's mysterious commitments. Freedom manifested in the form of a simple yes where there used to be elaborate diplomatic procedures. Some consequences create ripple effects in places you can't directly observe. A week later, Charlotte mentioned in two carefully neutral sentences that most of the people who had initially applauded Valentina's bravery online had stopped engaging with her posts because social media keeps its own record of tone and consistency. People maintain longer memories for disrespectful behavior than they typically admit. Her colleagues stopped appearing in her public photographs altogether. I invested in small, ordinary improvements that men make when they're redrawing the boundaries of their existence. I purchased a superior mattress and additional laundry baskets. I repositioned a comfortable chair near the front window and placed a notepad on the side table because I'd started developing different routing ideas for our distribution center expansion. I called my doctor and scheduled a comprehensive physical exam I'd been postponing for 18 months. I updated my emergency contact information back to my own name, at least until the next significant relationship develops its own requirements. None of these changes constituted a personal manifesto, they were simply maintenance, this time focused inward instead of outward. The final time I saw Valentina was in the driveway 2 Saturdays later when she returned for a box she'd overlooked, old journals, a winter coat, a tangle of electronic cables everyone accumulates for devices that died years ago. She didn't request entry to the house. I didn't offer invitation. We maintained 6 feet of distance like considerate neighbors. "You look well," she said, which meant I looked stable and centered. "Take care of yourself," I replied, and I genuinely meant it. She hesitated as if waiting for me to suggest a different conclusion, one where we reach for each other because endings feel scary and familiar comfort seems easier than unknown possibilities. I didn't offer alternative narratives because I wanted to preserve the part of myself that doesn't negotiate with disrespect. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. Charlotte was there with Marcus, and my father had the game playing softly in the background. My mother set a simple table, no ceremonial candles, just good plates and cold water, and asked if I wanted the end cut of the roast. I said yes. Halfway through the meal, Charlotte looked up from her food and said, "You're quieter, but in a positive way." The silence I was carrying felt different now, not the heavy quiet of someone suppressing difficult truths, but the lighter quiet that follows decisive action. When I returned home, the house felt accurate rather than empty. I placed my keys on their designated hook, filled the dog's water bowl, and stood for a moment in the entryway, looking at nothing particular. Somewhere across the city, she was constructing a life that didn't include me, and I wished her genuine clarity in that process. The difference between us is that I discovered my clarity without requiring a theatrical audience to witness the discovery. Respect isn't performed through grand speeches, it's a standard you enforce through consistent daily choices. It looks like new locks and organized paperwork, and a man who understands the exact weight he can carry without requesting someone else to serve as his emotional crutch. I walked away from a table where I was being offered less value than I brought to the relationship. That's not dramatic, that's simply adulthood functioning as designed. Before sleep, I texted my attorney a brief thanks for processing everything efficiently and set an alarm that didn't need to accommodate anyone else's schedule. Then I turned off the lights and listened to the house settle into itself, walls and foundation relaxing into their natural positions. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's sprinkler system activated with its gentle mechanical rhythm. The dog sighed deeply and found his favorite sleeping position by the door. I thought about the evening she stood up at my mother's table to announce the end of our marriage, and how I lifted my glass not to toast anything, but simply to punctuate a moment that required witnessing rather than celebration. That night, I didn't toast our ending either. I just closed my eyes and slept deeply, and in the morning I woke up to a life that responded respectfully when I asked it for what I deserved.